Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are. We're going to jump right in. But before we do, if you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Just click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day. The best sellers of all time for a band, that would be the Beatles. Best-selling solo male artist, Michael Jackson, and the best-selling female artist of all time is Madonna. I did a little quick YouTube video last night, just sort of giving a little roadmap of what's going to happen over the course of Chad's trial. Monday, April 1st, I'm recording this on Easter Sunday, but tomorrow, April 1st, jury selection starts in Chad Daybell's case. I'm going to be live streaming Chad's trial on my YouTube page. I think it's a cool way for alibiers to sit and listen to the testimony together and then discuss as it happens in the chat. During breaks, I may pop on and us chit-chat about things, but I won't be interrupting at all during any of the testimony. I'll just let that play in its entirety. I won't be in Boise for the entire 10-week trial, hoping to get up there a few times at least to sit in on a week of testimony, a week and a half. We'll see what happens, but I will still be doing some of the lunchtime Q&As with Law and Crime Network. The first one of those, as of now, is going to be April the 8th. So I'll keep you guys up to date on the lunchtime Q&As. At the end of every day, I'll be doing a recap episode where I sum up 8 hours of testimony in an hour or less for those of you that can't watch or don't want to watch. You know, on the podcast here, we say the long road to justice, and indeed it is that. It has been 1,665 days since Tylee Ryan was murdered, 1,651 days since JJ was murdered, 1,625 days since Tammy Daybell was murdered, and 1,391 days since Chad Daybell was arrested, the day they found Tylee and JJ's body on his property. I'm going to do a who's who video. This first episode, really, I think we're just going to focus on Chad. And how are we going to do that? Chad himself. Chad had a blog. It's cdaybell.com. It's still up. You can go look. It really gives good insight into how Chad feels about himself. And also, he just rambles on about a lot of things. We're seeing the world through Chad's eyes way before Lori Vallow ever came into his life. It's going to be a very abbreviated version, and it's going to take all week and probably an hour or more episodes. But I have over 70 episodes dedicated to a deep dive on this case. You can always go through that playlist. There are descriptions. That way, if you want to further explore certain topics we touch on during this refresher course, they're all there and waiting. Who is Chad Daybell? He is a self-proclaimed prophet. He was married to Tammy Douglas Daybell for 29 years before he allegedly killed her. They had 5 kids throughout the course of their marriage, and they also have several grandkids. Chad is charged with conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of Lori's 2 children, JJ Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. He's also facing the same for his wife, Tammy Daybell. In addition to the murder charges, he is charged with grand theft as well as insurance fraud. Lori Vallow, if you don't know her, there's not an episode long enough to describe this woman, but in short, she is the mother of JJ and Tylee. She is also the current wife of Chad Daybell. Lori's had 5 husbands. Her 3rd husband, Joe Ryan, the biological father of Tylee Ryan, he died April 3rd, 2018 of cardiovascular disease. Investigators did look at his death again when this case blew wide open, but ultimately that was ruled natural and the case was closed again. Just last year, Lori went on trial for the murders of JJ, Tylee, and conspiracy to commit murder for Tammy, as well as grand theft by deception. She was convicted on all charges, sentenced to life in prison in Idaho. She is currently in Maricopa County, Arizona, to face charges for conspiracy to commit murder in the death of her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, who is also the father of JJ Vallow, as well as conspiracy to commit murder for Brandon Boudreaux, who is that's her ex-nephew-in-law, the ex-husband of her niece, who I call Melanice, since there are 2 Melanies in this case. We're going to start off with Chad's About Me section from his website back in 2001. It says, "Hello there. Thanks for visiting my website. I must first give proper credit to my wife, Tammy, the webmaster, who designed these pages. Without her, I'd still be trying to get the computer working, much less write a novel on it. We hope to make this a fun journey for you to discover behind the scenes information about the Emma trilogy. The Emma trilogy is a series of books that Chad wrote. We are eager to hear from you, and we'll post your reviews and questions on the site. I thought I'd let you know a little bit about me. I was born in 1968 in Provo, Utah, to Jack and Sheila Chestnut Daybell. My father was serving in the Navy during Vietnam, and we lived in San Diego for nearly 2 years. Since then, I've always felt a bond to San Diego, including cheering for the San Diego Padres, despite their mediocrity. I'm the oldest of 5 children, and Paul, Matt, Brad, and Becky have been wonderful siblings. Our neighborhood had many vacant fields, and we had a great time exploring them as we grew up. We also had plenty of friends around to see if we wanted to play baseball, basketball, or football. I had aspirations to be a professional athlete, but my youthful growth spurts seem humorously timed. I'm now 6'3", but I didn't really grow at all during 7th or 8th grades, and soon found myself as one of the shortest kids in school. Then the following summer, I sprouted 6 inches, which left me rather uncoordinated. I played on Springville High's junior varsity baseball team, but I certainly didn't dazzle anyone. When it comes to books, I guess I identify more with the clumsy teenage Emma rather than the athletic Doug. My younger brothers all excelled in sports, so there is some real-life basis for the book An Errand for Emma. However, my mission to New Jersey is the foundation for Doug's experiences in Doug's Dilemma. Every missionary event in that novel is based on an actual occurrence. It was a crazy 2 years, but extremely fulfilling. The Spanish-speaking people are fun-loving and upbeat, no matter what obstacles they face. I made many dear friends there that I'm still close to and admire. I came home a more compassionate person after my experiences there. My post-mission plans included staying single for a long time so I could get through school. So naturally, within 15 days of arriving home, I attended a singles ward volleyball game and met my future wife, Tammy Douglas, who is the daughter of Ron and Phyllis Douglas. Tammy was working at the Springville Parks Department secretary at the time of our first date. I would be starting school at BYU in less than a month and needed a job. Tammy knew of an opening for a part-time cemetery worker, and while it wasn't a job I'd ever considered, it offered a flexible schedule and a chance to see Tammy several times a day. Little did we know the role that job would eventually play in our lives. Tammy and I were married 7 months later. I worked at a cemetery for 2 years, then accepted the position of assistant city editor for BYU's newspaper, The Daily Universe. The following semester, I served as city editor and then graduated in April of 1992. Following graduation, I took a job as a copy editor and headline writer with the Standard Examiner in Ogden, Utah, and it was a good experience. We lived in the suburb of Washington Terrace and made some good friends, and I grew close to some of the best and brightest coworkers I'd ever had. But Tammy and I both felt a yearning to have our children grow up near their grandparents. One night, my brothers told me that Springville's cemetery sexton was going to retire. It felt like the timing was right to make a move, so I applied for the position and was hired. So I went from writing headlines to digging graves. It paid better and allowed us to move back to Springville. In late 1997, 2 years after I became the sexton, I was shoveling snow at the cemetery when I felt the prompting, "It's time to write your book." This came as a complete surprise to me. I'd written some family histories, but I'd never been able to come up with a plot for a book. But almost immediately after receiving the prompting, the entire plot of An Errand for Emma poured in my head. I wrote it within a few months, and it was published about a year after that initial prompting. When it came time to write another book, I was undecided about the topic, but my prayers were answered one day as the plot to Doug's Dilemma filled my head, as well as the plot for Escape to Zion. I'm very grateful for the hand of the Lord in this project, and I hope I've done an adequate job with the material I've been given. I recently took the opportunity to work in the publishing industry. So that is my current occupation, along with my continued writing efforts. Tammy and I now have 5 children: Garth, Emma, Seth, Leah, and Mark. We still live in Springville, and it will be interesting to see if our daughter Emma turns out anything like the character she inspired. Thank you for visiting, and I hope you enjoy your journey here. Let's start from the very, very beginning. 1968, Chad Daybell is born in Provo, Utah, the oldest of 5 children. And what prompted Chad's spiritual gifts? Well, it started in August of 1985. Chad was 17 and a rising senior in high school. He and some friends went on a trip to Flaming Gorge Reservoir in Utah. Chad and his friends like to jump off the cliffs down into the water. And on this trip, Chad saw a cliff that was about 60 feet high and jumped off of it. He said it felt like slamming into concrete, and he saw a white flash of light. He felt a pop in his head and thought initially he had broken his neck. Then he realized his spirit was out of his body. His physical body went deeper into the water, but his spirit knees got stuck and didn't make it all the way out. He looked around and saw an endless white plain in all directions, and as his body got close to the surface, his spirit was sucked back into place. A friend jumped in to bring him to shore, and Chad told his friend, "Something snapped when I hit the water. I'm done for the day." He says after that day, he was a changed person. Now, he doesn't remember talking to anyone in the white light, but he began to devour church-related books, scriptures, and the works of several authors. By the way, some of those authors are seen as very controversial in the Mormon church. He said he had a strong impression he would need this information later in life. He said when he hit the water, he thinks his personal veil was torn open and did not seal up properly. He became receptive to sensing spirits, feeling promptings, and impressions. He said this helped him steer clear of people and situations that may have led him into trouble. But Chad, Lori Vallow's coming your way in a few decades. Guess you didn't see that one coming. He would get glimpses about his future. He said the glimpses were annoying but tolerable. 8 years later, he had another water experience that really, as he says, threw the barn doors open on his interaction with the other side. On Chad's blog, October 27th, 2015, he posts about this second incident that he says completely tore open his veil and let him have 1 foot in the spirit world. Chad wrote, "I looked up and there was a monstrous wave bearing down on me. My dad was watching me from the beach. He estimated the wave was at least 15 feet high. I was in a precarious position on the tip of this rock outcropping. For a second, I considered trying to ride the wave in, but I would have surely been sliced apart by the jagged rocks. An audible voice shouted in my ear, 'Get down and cling to that rock.' I did as the voice commanded and grabbed hold of a 2-foot wide boulder just as the wave crashed down on me. The force was incredible, and it took all of my strength not to get ripped away and tossed around. Then my surroundings changed, and I found myself in the proverbial tunnel of light. It wasn't a bright white light, but more like a warm yellow heat lamp. I felt I was wrapped in a warm blanket or cocoon, and I felt extremely happy. This time I saw 2 male figures standing about 10 feet above me, and they told me several things I still don't remember. I believe one of them was my grandpa, Keith Daybell, my dad's father, who was killed in a logging accident in 1951. Then I returned to my body. The wave had passed, and my dad and brothers were rushing towards me. Dad said, 'I was sure you were dead,' and I guess he was half right. We looked at my hands, and my fingertips were all shredded from where I had clung to the rock. I must have let go when my spirit left my body, though, because I'd been tossed around, and the left side of my back had large gashes. We loaded me up and took me to the hospital to get stitches. Thankfully, I didn't receive any long-lasting injuries." On that blog, he had a photo of himself in swim trunks, captioned, "A nice shot of some awesome early 1990s swim trunks, as well as my stitched up back after a trip to a San Diego hospital." Chad continues, "There was a long-term effect from the incident, though. My personal veil had been ripped open again, and this time it didn't close nearly as much as it had after my Flaming Gorge experience. I started having deja vu experiences and other waking visions where I could see the outcome of certain choices for my family. I also had direct intervention in my life from the other side. I graduated from BYU with a bachelor's degree and was working at the Ogden Standard Examiner at the time. My dad was strongly encouraging me to start working on a master's degree through Utah State. It made sense if I wanted to move up in the publishing world. I went to the Utah State University Extension office in downtown Ogden and picked up an application. But as I sat down at a table to fill it out, I felt like the pen I was holding was on fire. I dropped it, and I distinctly heard the words, 'This is the wrong direction. You won't need additional schooling to accomplish your life's mission.' The voice was accompanied by one of the strongest burning of the bosom moments I've ever had. I stood up and threw the application in a recycling bin. This answer was really a shock to me because my long-term goal growing up had been to eventually earn a doctorate degree. The interesting thing is, although I was by far the most studious of my brothers, they all now have advanced degrees and I don't. But the voice was correct. If I had returned to college, none of what has happened since would have taken place. I would have never become an author or been in a position to help other authors publish their experiences. Beginning on July 15th, 1987, and ending at some point in 1989, Chad serves his Spanish-speaking mission in Morristown, New Jersey. In a blog post on August 24th of 2015, Chad blogs with the title Elder Drago and a Special Visitor. He says, my freshman year at BYU can be summed up in one word: boring. I had received a full tuition scholarship. I was worried about getting bad grades and losing the scholarship. So each day, I drove to school from Springville, went to my classes, studied in the library, and then went back home. I did hang out with some high school friends during my first semester, but once they started going on missions, my social life was basically non-existent. I dated a girl a couple of times who was in my Communications 101 class, but we didn't really click. She was from Florida, and on our final date, she said, sorry, but you need to get out and see the world. There's more to life than Utah Valley. I was slightly offended. I mean, I'd been to Disneyland 3 times with my family, and one time I had walked about a mile into Tijuana, Mexico. Then there was the trip to the Four Corners Monument where I stood in 4 different states at the same time. What did she mean I hadn't seen the world? I was about to find out. I was called to serve as a Spanish-speaking missionary in the New Jersey Morristown Mission. I entered the missionary training camp on July 15th, 1987, and I loved it there. With my partially torn veil, I was on a spiritual high in the MTC. It was like having loads of spiritual light dumped on me throughout the day. MTC President George Durant's powerful talks always filled me with great enthusiasm. I felt closer to the Savior there than I ever had. One time during our classroom study, our teacher had shared with us a poem about the Savior leaving his heavenly home to suffer the indignities of earth life for our sakes. As the teacher read it, I could visualize the scenes of what was happening in the poem, and I started sobbing in gratitude. I couldn't stop. The teacher just stared at me as if to say, get a grip, man, it's just a poem. Finally, the teacher told the rest of my district to take a break, and he left me alone in the room as I got my emotions under control. I was embarrassed, but I was also exuberant because the Spirit had testified so strongly to me of the Savior and his mission. During the first few months of my mission, I kept my hair fairly long compared to other missionaries. Then I got transferred to Union City, where a member lived who owned a beauty salon. She always cut the missionary's hair for free, and on our next P-Day, we went to the salon. I got in the chair, and without any hesitation, she took a razor and went right up the back of my head. I saw a substantial chunk of hair fall to the ground beside me. Before I knew it, I had a flat top, and the sides of my head were shaved to the skin. That should last you a few weeks, she said, clearly proud of her work. I mumbled my thanks, then waited for my companion who was getting his hair cut by an assistant in another corner. When he finally saw me, he said, whoa, the president might not like that. I shrugged, well, there's nothing I can do about it now. Streets of Little Cuba in Union City, all the kids pointed at me and shouted the same phrase, then ran away. Finally, we asked a grinning teenage boy sitting on a porch what they were saying. On his blog, he has a photo of Drago from Rocky IV, the Russian that Rocky fights the whole movie. They're saying Drago, he said. They think you're Ivan Drago, the Russian guy who fought Rocky. By 1987, Rocky IV had made its way to Spanish TV, and these Hispanic kids were thinking Drago himself was walking the streets of New Jersey looking for a rematch. It was kind of a stretch, you don't say, Chad. But these kids had only ever seen 2 tall, pasty white guys with flat tops, Drago and me. I dealt with that nickname for much of my mission. Even though I didn't learn the Spanish language very quickly, I immediately felt accepted and loved by the Hispanic members. I came to realize something I'd never known. Many of these members regularly received dreams and visions. I had been hiding my new visionary gifts and hadn't really told anyone about my Flaming Gorge experience, but these people talked about their visions openly. My companion was talking to the other family members, so I said to Raphael, I have visions too, but I don't dare tell anyone. Back in Utah, they'd think I'm crazy. By the way, the name Raphael will come in later. That will be a name Lori would eventually refer to Chad as. Raphael looked at me in shock. The Mormons in Utah don't talk about these things? I shook my head, and Raphael responded, that's a key reason I knew the church is true. The first vision, the angel Moroni, John the Baptist appearing, Peter, James, and John given the priesthood, and the angels at the Kirtland Temple. It's the whole foundation of the church. Oh, they'll mention them as historical events, but it's as if the members there don't believe they still happen now. Raphael got fired up. The veil was very thin for Joseph Smith, and it still is for me and my family. We talk about it all the time, and our ancestors help guide us. During a Sunday dinner appointment with a Peruvian family, I sat down next to the husband, Raphael. He had shared his testimony in a meeting that day, a vision where his great-grandpa had appeared to him while he was investigating the church in Peru. The grandpa had told Raphael to get baptized and move to America. So here I am, he said. That conversation was a turning point for me. I began to consciously develop my gift and could recognize good and bad spirits as we knocked on doors. My tracing area consisted of thousands of apartment buildings along the Hudson River, and I can testify that most of them are haunted. Maybe haunted is too strong of a word. Better said, the buildings are inhabited by disembodied spirits who died and don't really know where to go next, so they hang around places they lived in mortality. Sometimes families would complain about supernatural disturbances, and we would use the priesthood to cast out these disruptive spirits. But often during a missionary lesson, I would sense both angels and disembodied spirits in the room, and I thought, hey, if these spirits want to listen in, what could it hurt? I sometimes saw the angels talking to them afterward. I feel there were some lessons that were more effective for those spirits than for the mortals we were teaching. Then came a cherished moment in March 1988 that helped fortify me. I'm going to quote directly from my mission journal. As we walked home tonight, I had an experience that I will always treasure. As we were walking home, my companion was on my left next to the road. And for about 30 seconds as I walked along, it was as if time stopped for me because I could sense the spirit of my deceased grandpa, Keith Daybell, walking along with us on my right side. I actually didn't see him with my natural eyes, but he was tangibly there. And he actually rubbed shoulders with me a time or two. He was killed in a logging accident in 1951 at a young age, so I never met him in this life, but I instantly knew who he was. I could almost sense his happiness at my recognition of him. No actual words passed between us, but I was given the knowledge of how proud he was of my efforts and that he'd been there for me from time to time during my mission. He then departed, and I came back to my senses. Grandpa Keith is the same person I would see in the light a few years later when I had my near-death experience at La Jolla Cove. He was still watching over me then, and even to this day, he is with me at crucial moments in my life. Chad said his post-mission plans included staying single for a long time to get through school, but 15 days after arriving home, he met Tammy, and he writes about this in the August 31st blog 2015, which is called A Cemetery Courtship. He says, in my last post, I ended by describing how I felt when I saw my future wife Tammy's photo in a yearbook. I asked my brothers about her, and I was thrilled to find out she was the secretary for Springville's Parks and Cemeteries Department. I still couldn't figure out why I couldn't remember her. Then I came to understand that some sort of spiritual veil had been placed over my mind concerning her during high school. If we had gotten to know each other at that time, we would have become inseparable, but we still had many growing experiences to go through on our own before we became a couple. The timing wasn't right for either one of us. However, I was surprised to find out later that Tammy had been keeping an eye on me since her sophomore year. I was on the Springville High Student Council, and she was in the audience during the assemblies. The student body president and I would put together crazy skits, such as dancing wildly around and jumping off the stage like rock stars. Despite this, Tammy still admired me from afar in the school halls. While I was on my mission, she'd even told her friends, I'm going to date Chad Daybell when he gets home. During my final interview with my mission president, I explained I wanted to teach at the Missionary Training Center in Provo. I would be attending BYU, and I thought a job there would work out well. My mission president had connections at the MTC and wrote a wonderful letter of recommendation for me. A few days after I got home, I took the letter to the MTC and was interviewed on the spot. The interview went great. I filled out some paperwork and then returned the following week to teach classes to actual missionaries. An evaluator observed me and afterward said he was impressed. He said to expect a call to start working there within a week. I was excited that everything had gone so smoothly. At church, they had announced a singles ward family night, and I was really hoping Tammy would be there. When I arrived, the group was already playing a ragtag game of volleyball. I'd spotted Tammy from the moment I entered the cultural hall. She later told me she was watching me too, although at the time I wasn't aware. She knew who I was. She was on one volleyball team, so I joined the other team, and soon we rotated to be across the net from each other. We stared at each other for a moment before she confidently said, I'm going to spike it in your face. I smiled at her comment, but the only reply I could come up with was, Oh, yeah? Then the ball was served into the net and we rotated away from each other. We didn't speak again the rest of the night, although we still played a cat and mouse game of keeping an eye on each other. Towards the end of the night, a friend said he wanted to go on a double date on Friday, so I told him I would ask Tammy out. I went home and called her, and I was relieved when she accepted. I later found out Tammy had actually danced around the living room after she hung up the phone. Tammy hadn't been too big on dating, so her parents sensed from her excited reaction that she might actually be interested in me. Friday finally arrived. We were both a little nervous, but I was smitten right from the start. The date went great, and we went to a fireside at the Marriott Center 2 days later. I was feeling good about how things were going. That next week, I returned to the MTC because I hadn't heard anything from them about my job. I talked to the secretary and explained I'd gone through the whole process and was waiting to hear my start date. I remember you, she said. The evaluator said you did well. Let me get your file. She opened the filing cabinet behind her and shuffled through some papers. I know it was right here, she said. I waited for 5 minutes as she checked every possible spot the file could be, but it just wasn't there. She called in the evaluator and asked if he had taken my file. No, he said. Can't you find it? To make a long story short, they never found it. The evaluator finally said, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to start over. If you fill out the paperwork today, we could have you teach a class next week. You already saw me teach, I said. Can't we go from that? He said, I wish, but I need a record of the missionaries' evaluations of you, and that group left last week. Don't worry, it'll go quickly. I was a bit perturbed, but I took the paperwork with me and returned home. I called Tammy at her job and told her what happened. I guess I'll just do it all again, I said. Tammy had other ideas. She knew my brother was leaving on his mission soon and was going to quit working at the cemetery. Tammy called the cemetery sexton, Denny Pickering, and told him that I was looking for a part-time job. Really? Denny asks. That would be great. Have him put in an application. Tammy called me and said, I think I found a job for you. I was soon hired, and that's how I got into the cemetery business. In retrospect, I know there was some heavily intervention involved in my missing MTC file because the cemetery job would actually be a better fit for me in every way. I could work longer hours at a higher hourly wage, and I could see the woman I was interested in more often. Tammy's office was downtown, but at times she had to bring burial reports to the cemetery. Then he told me, Tammy used to bring those reports up here once a week. Now she seems to come almost every day. Her visits usually happen to coincide with my break time, and our cemetery courtship allowed us to get better acquainted. Within a month, we took the bold step of actually sitting next to each other during the single ward's sacrament meeting. The universal sign to other ward members, we were now a couple and pretty much off limits to anyone else. I began praying sincerely whether Tammy was the person I should marry. One evening, I was driving alone from BYU back to Springville. I told Heavenly Father that even though I'd only known Tammy for about 10 weeks, I'd decided to propose to her. I received such a strong yes that it brought tears to my eyes. That night, I unofficially proposed to her. Then on the night before Thanksgiving, I knelt down before her and gave her a diamond engagement ring. She said yes, and we spent Thanksgiving Day showing the ring to our extended families. We registered for 3 classes together during BYU's winter semester, and Tammy literally saved my grade in statistics. I never would have survived that class without her. We were married in March 1990 in the Manti Temple and just really enjoyed being newlyweds. However, it wasn't long before our future children started making their presence known through the veil. They were anxious to come to Earth and wanted to know what we were waiting for. Chad goes on to detail the children coming through the veil, saying they want to be born. In a blog post on September 4th, 2015, Chad posted a blog titled, Don't Forget About Me. He talks about soon after he and Tammy were married, she accepted a full-time secretary position with Springville City. The city leaders realized it was time to computerize all of the old handwritten cemetery cards, as well as double-check their accuracy. It was more work than Tammy could do on a part-time basis, so they created the new position. The job came with full insurance benefits, and it was a blessing to us. I was still on scholarship and progressing through BYU's journalism program. I was offered the assistant city editor position at the Daily Universe beginning fall semester 1991, and suddenly Tammy and I felt rich. We were eating out a lot, going to concerts, buying whole boxes of Symphony candy bars at Sam's Club, and so on. Life was great. I was just enjoying living in the now. For once, I put the future out of my mind. I had an adorable, loving wife. We both had good jobs, and we were both having a lot of fun. Then came the announcement I'd been hoping to postpone for another year or two. Tammy said, I feel like it's time we start our family. Chad asked if she was sure or if she wanted to wait until he had a solid job, but Tammy felt it was time. Soon after, their first child was on the way. He goes on to say, fast forward a few months later to my BYU graduation. Tammy was due in a month, and I was still worried how everything was going to work out. She told me she had prayed about it and was going to quit her job when the baby was born. She was confident I would find a job to support the family. I should have trusted her. She doesn't have dreams or visions, but when the Spirit confirms something to her, I pay attention. Garth was born in late May, and we loved our new little son. The copy editor job at the Ogden Standard Examiner materialized within a month, and we moved to Weber County. As I outlined in an earlier post, the new job had a few pros and cons. Tammy and I were getting along fine, but Garth was actually turning into a wild child. He would get into the kitchen cupboards and dump everything out, particularly syrup. He was also a master climber. If he saw Tammy put cookies in the cupboard above the fridge, he would find a way to get them when she wasn't looking. And one particularly challenging day, I went to the Ogden Temple to pray and contemplate my family's future. I was blessed to receive a special vision where I was shown our children many years down the road. The kids seemed to be in their early 20s to late teens, and they were wearing church clothes. It seemed to be a special event. I watched them interact with each other from about 10 feet away. I recognized Garth, and he still had light hair. He was talking to a taller man with brown hair. There were also two girls in the dream. The older one had dark, short hair. She was smiling at a girl with blonde hair. The four kids talked among themselves for a moment. Then a brown-haired boy in his early teens came skipping into the room saying, "Don't forget about me." He joined the four others and smiled in my direction. This boy was the exact image of our son Mark, right down to the mischievous smile. I knew I was seeing the 5 children that Tammy and I would raise. It was neat to see their hair color and even their personalities. I went home and told Tammy about the vision, and it brought great peace of mind to us that Garth might someday behave. A few years later, we were living in Springville again. I had taken the cemetery sexton job, and Tammy was 8 months along with our 4th child, Leah. I got an urgent call one morning that Tammy felt something was wrong. Her mom, Phyllis, was taking her to the Payson Hospital, and I should meet her there. When I arrived, Tammy was in a hospital gown waiting for her doctor to see her. She was laying on a bed explaining how she felt something pop deep inside her. As we talked, she started bleeding heavily, and it turned into a frantic situation. I gave her a quick priesthood blessing, and the nurses rushed her into an operating room. Phyllis and I got out of the way and then waited anxiously. I snuck down the hall and peered through the room's small window. All I could see was the top of Tammy's head as several nurses and 2 doctors surrounded her. I was scared, but I also felt it wasn't Tammy's time to die. Within a couple of minutes, Leah was born via emergency C-section about 4 weeks early. She was a tiny little thing, but she rebounded quickly and soon was the same size as other children her age. Needless to say, the doctor told us that Tammy was done having kids. He had to slice through her stomach muscles to save Leah, and combined with other factors, he advised her against ever getting pregnant again. At the time, I was just relieved Tammy and Leah were okay, but lingering in the back of my mind was the sing-song chant of "Don't forget about me." I didn't press the issue, but Tammy hadn't forgotten about the vision either. We had some serious concerns, especially after Leah's traumatic birth, but we also had faith the Lord would watch over her. Tammy became pregnant in the summer of 1999, and thankfully, there were few complications. Mark was born in March 2000. It strengthened our testimony to see how each child fit into that vision, and we knew that our family was now complete. That vision was so implanted on my mind that it had been a little eerie to see the kids become the people I'd seen. However, I'd never seen all 5 kids together like I had in the vision. When Garth departed on his mission to Oklahoma in 2011, Mark was still a small boy. Then Emma left on her mission to Tennessee before Garth returned. With the lowering of mission ages, Seth was getting ready to leave on his mission in June before Emma got home. It looked like we'd have a stretch of nearly 6 years without having all 5 children home at the same time. And I began to wonder if the dream was simply symbolic. Then we received word that Emma had contracted a serious illness on her mission and needed to return home a few months early. We picked her up at the airport in December 2013. She was pale and deathly ill. It took her several months to recover. Meanwhile, Seth had received his mission call to Virginia. The night that Seth was set apart as a missionary, the 5 kids all put on mission badges and posed together. As I watched them, I got emotional, realizing the day had finally arrived I'd seen in my vision. I was so grateful Mark had not been forgotten. So just a little recap. 92, Chad graduates BYU with a major in journalism. 1993, that's that second near-death experience in La Jolla. 1995, Chad became the Springville Cemetery sexton. 1997, he got the first prompting to write his book, An Errand for Emma. He said, in the late 1990s, as I was writing my novel, Escape to Zion, I began having many dreams and visions relating to my family's future. For example, one night I had a vivid dream that Tammy had taken the kids to the Spanish Fork Kmart. In the dream, I watched Tammy lead the kids across the parking lot to the store entrance. Then little Seth broke free and stumbled ahead of the others. I distinctly noted he was wearing a particular pair of blue overalls. Just then, a blue Cadillac driven by a Polynesian man came speeding by and ran over Seth, killing him instantly. The dream obviously disturbed me, but I had to leave for work before Tammy woke up. So later that morning, I called her. Before I could even tell her about the dream, she said, I've got to get the kids ready. I'm taking them to Kmart. I immediately asked what Seth was wearing, and it was blue overalls. I told her about the dream, and we agreed I should go to the store with them. They picked me up at the cemetery, and I carried Seth into the store. Everything was exactly as I'd seen it in the dream in terms of the angle of the sun and so on. We didn't see a blue Cadillac, though. I believe we altered the timeline by a few minutes when Tammy picked me up to go with them. I have no doubt it was a warning dream sent straight from heaven. Another dream I kept having at this time was that the Twin Towers were burning. In the dream, I was always on the street below the towers. They were both on fire and people were running and screaming. I didn't know the cause, but from my vantage point, it seemed like all of Manhattan was on fire. This dream had deep personal significance since I served my entire mission in New Jersey along the Hudson River. The Twin Towers were like a central beacon to me. I have several photos with them in the background, and we visited them when my parents picked me up after my mission. I even included what I had seen in Escape to Zion. In the book, the main character, Emma, is in the future. She reads an old newspaper about the Twin Towers being burned. So it kind of threw me for a loop when it actually happened a year later. In 2001, Chad gives an interview about his job as sexton. In the interview, he says, sad times are always when you have to bury babies. That's always a poignant moment. It is so eerie to hear some of this stuff, knowing what we know now. In March of 2003, Chad's books are pulled from the desert bookstore shelves due to a scene in Chasing Paradise where a warrior angel drop kicks a naughty spirit through the wall. March 1st, 2004, Chad and Tammy founded Spring Creek Books, a publishing company. Tammy was the chief financial officer. She also designed book covers. On the website, it says their objective is to publish high-quality, uplifting products that will strengthen and bless the lives of families. The company only publishes material that supports the values of the LDS Church. In 2008, times get tough. Chad and Tammy file for bankruptcy. They owed $202,732 to over 60 creditors. The majority of those debts were tied to their Spring Creek book publishing company. They claim in filings that Chad, the great author, his books brought in about $2,000 a year, but it was decreasing yearly. Their monthly income together was $3,930 between the publishing company, Chad's job as a part-time gravedigger, and Tammy's job at the school. Their mortgage was $135,900. Tammy's sister, Samantha, confirmed this in an episode of Dateline just a few years back where she said he was making around $2,000 a year, and ultimately his books and the publishing company is what pushed them into bankruptcy. August 2008 through 2009, Chad works as a part-time cemetery maintenance worker in Springville, Utah. Also in 2008, Chad posts on his blog that when the recession happens in the U.S., he predicted it, but the end times are still several years away. Chad said one of the main parts of the book says the government will encourage human microchip implants. February 1st, 2009, Chad gets a job as a cemetery sexton in Spanish Fork City. And the reason? The recession, again, was not kind to his book company. By 2010, Chad and Tammy's bankruptcy was over. They had $203,000 in debts forgiven. September 2011, this always cracks me up, y'all. Chad said Tammy's deceased grandmother visited him and said Tammy needs to stop playing Frontierville and get back to her genealogy and her temple work. Chad was so inspired by this visit by grandma that he typed the message up and gave it to Tammy and her parents to read. Come on, we were all playing Farmville and Frontierville. Y'all, I had all the corn. May of 2012, Chad begins to publish non-Mormon doctrine stories. By May 25th of 2012, little JJ was born. He was a preemie Little dude only weighed 2 pounds and 14 ounces, a fighter from day one. In 2013, Charles and Lori began the adoption process for JJ. For those of you not familiar with the story, JJ was an in family adoption. JJ was actually the great nephew of Charles Vallow. His sister, Kay Woodcock, is JJ's grandmother. JJ went to live with Charles and Lori when he was around 9 months old. May of 2013, Chad works as a Springville cemetery sexton and Tammy is a secretary at a high school in Springville. Sometime in 2014, Chad meets Julie Rowe on the AVAL message boards. Julie Rowe is a whole story in herself. But ultimately, she had a podcast that I think Lori and Alex really started developing these offshoot ideas. She's got some wild ideas, y'all. She's got a TikTok. Check it out. Julie Rowe's podcast and Chad's books, to me, I think were the perfect storm for Lori, along with her delusions of grandeur, that she was meant to be something bigger in this world than what she was. Chad met Julie Rowe on the AVAL message board. A voice of warning is a message board just for a lot of like-minded people, preppers who believe the end is near, and they talk about prepping for the end of the world, essentially. Like I said, I'm not getting too deep in all these beliefs because we could be here till the actual second coming. He published her book about 2004. It was about near-death experiences. And Julie became close with Chad and Tammy. She was also a regular visitor at their home in Rexburg after they moved for 3 years. Julie said that when her and Chad started working together, they talked on the phone almost daily, and they would talk about and compare their visions about what they saw happening in the future. These people need to be like Stevie Nicks and keep their visions to themselves. I'm just saying. She said Chad once told her about an out-of-body experience he had where his spirit came out of his body. His kids were there. His wife was there to witness it, and it was completely outside of his body in his house for a few minutes, and then he got back in it. Julie said after that, I started to notice some changes in him. He started talking to me about past lives. Julie also said 3 weeks or so before Chad's wife Tammy is murdered, Chad told her his plans could not progress until Tammy was dead. Julie said it bothered her, and she told her husband about it. She was concerned, but apparently not concerned enough to tell Tammy about it. July 25th, 2014, JJ is formally adopted by Charles and Lori. August 2014, Chad's mom rented a cabin in Island Park, Idaho for a big family get-together. Chad said he was at a gas station in St. Anthony. That's about 15 minutes from Rexburg. And as he's filling his van with gas, he looks south over the valley and a voice said, "You will live here soon." After the vacation, Chad went to the temple in Provo to get confirmation. He said he did, but he was left in the dark about the timing. October 2014, Chad leaves his job as Springville cemetery sexton. At the end of 2014 to 2015, just for reference, Lori and her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, moved to Hawaii. Now, a friend who wanted to remain anonymous talked to one of the OGs on this case, Justin Lum from Fox 10 Phoenix, and said she watched Lori become obsessed with Chad's books, especially a series called Standing in Holy Places. And what's ironic about this series, y'all, is a character is upset at his wife for following prophecies signaling the end of the world. And at one point in the book, the character Tad says to his wife, Emma, "I'm not the one tearing our family apart. You're the one who is selfishly taking my children away." Also in the book, Tad is running from law enforcement and describes how difficult it is to sleep. It's a little ironic, y'all, don't you think? Another friend from Lori's days when she lived in Hawaii spoke to Fox 5 and said that Lori was 100% into the end of times and the end of the world, and she would tell you, you really got to start preparing for the end of the world. You got to start getting your stuff together. She would order stuff all the time and would tell this friend that she needed to read all of Chad's books. She would also buy these books and give them to her friends. Lori would say things to her like, "I'm never going to get divorced again. I'm on my fourth husband." And then she would say, "You got to get rid of your husband. We'll just go off and do our own thing." At one point, Lori told this friend, "It's going to be the end of the world and we should all just drive off a cliff and kill us and our kids and die at the same time." This is something Lori would later tell Annie Cushing, who is the sister of Lori's third husband, Joe Ryan. Annie is also the aunt of Tylee Ryan when Annie visited after the death of her brother, Joe. I have a whole episode on his death. Very questionable to me, but ultimately ruled natural both times. She also mentioned that Lori would fly Tylee's friend to Hawaii to visit, and Lori was known on the island as Mother of the Year. We've heard that over and over from people. A lot of people say Lori was never a great mother, but people will show you what they want you to see. And when later on they reveal who they truly are, you can't help that you believe that first version. Everybody that I've talked to that knew Lori for any length of time said they would have never guessed that any of this would have ever happened. And I get that. Later on, Chad would tell Lori that in 2014 to 2015 is the time frame when Tylee turned into a zombie. If you don't know this case, we will explain zombies and all that jazz on the next episode. February of 2015, Chad has a second vision about moving. He said, I was walking down a path and I came to a fork in the path. As I looked down the right fork, I saw in the distance a glorious city with a temple in the center of it. A voice said, moving to Rexburg will be a tremendous blessing to your children and your grandchildren. He said he glanced down the left fork and sensed it represented us not moving away. That path was filled with many lost opportunities. But after this vision, he reread his children's patriarchal blessings, and each one verified what I had seen. I was still waiting for the right time to even mention to my family, though. A couple of weeks later, as we were eating dinner, the following words slipped out of my mouth. When we moved to Rexburg, Tammy wasn't thrilled, and I completely understood her feelings. Moving to Idaho would be a major undertaking that would uproot us from our families. So I tried not to bring it up again. Then, after a few weeks, she also felt impressed by the spirit that it was what we should do. She started looking at real estate websites, and one house in particular jumped out at us. And there was a second home that seemed like it might work. So we decided to drive to Rexburg in late March. We had learned from past experiences that if we were supposed to move, things would fall into place almost magically. If we weren't supposed to move yet, nothing would work out. I called up the realtor of the first home and she agreed to meet us there the following Saturday. I mentioned the second home and she arranged for us to look at it as well. We went to the first house and it wasn't what had been advertised. We were disappointed, but decided to look at the second home. It was a lot like our home in Springville, except it had 4 acres of pasture and a pond. The home needed new carpet and fresh paint, but as I walked through the pasture and discussed the house with my son Garth, we both really felt this was the place for us. Garth said, I feel I could really thrive here. Tammy and the other children agreed, and from that point on, everything came together quickly. We closed on the house in early June. So we're going to end it there. When we pick up tomorrow, we're going to kind of finish up this backstory and start diving into the main timeline of when Chad and Lori meet for the first time, and we're going to go from there. So that's it for today. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. We'll see you soon.